I forget what Bruce was working on, but somewhere along the line he said, "Hey, you want to hear something?" I said, "Yeah." And he said to his assistant, "Go get that tape out that we're playing just before." And it was a safety copy of Thriller from Michael Jackson. So we're in this great studio with great sound, and he cranks the thing up, and it was just fabulous listening to this thing. Like, no one's ever heard it like this unless you were there.
Bobby Owsinski, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks so much, Artie. I'm really pleased to talk to you today.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to it. You are an award-winning author. You've written over 24 books on music, the music industry, social media, everything like that. And you host your podcast, Bobby Owsinski's Inner Circle podcast. And you do speaking. You've been in the music industry for quite a few years. Aside from that, anything else you'd want listeners who might not be familiar with you to know?
Let's see. My hobby is cruising.
Nice.
Taking cruises, because I didn't take a vacation for 30 years, and now I'm trying to make up for it.
Nice. Do you have a favorite place to cruise? Or where's your favorite place been so far?
Well, let's see. New Zealand, Iceland, Cuba I liked a lot.
Oh, really? Nice.
Yeah. There's quite a number of places I've been to, and most of them I really loved.
Awesome. Yeah, it sounds like a lot of fun.
Yeah.
New Zealand especially. I hope to get there one day.
Yeah, I liked it a lot. Australia too.
Yeah.
Both down unders are good.
Yeah. Well, I have a lot that I want to talk to you about today. I want to hear a little bit about your background as far as like how you got into the music industry. I'll tell you real quick how I learned about you. I started producing music just as a solo producer, I don't know, 8 years ago, just for fun. And I'm a reader too. And I just search on Amazon or whatever bookstore, try to find some good books on in the music industry. And I ended up buying 3 of your books. I have them here. I have the Music Producer's Handbook. I have Mastering Engineer's Handbook. And then I have by far my favorite one. And I think every music producer, anyone working with audio should get this, is the Mixing Engineer's Handbook. Absolutely love it. I know you're on the 5th edition now, so maybe I'll have to get an updated copy. But yeah, I would love to hear how you got in the music industry. Like, is where you're at today or where you've gone through your career, is that where you thought you'd be? Or is it a completely different course than you originally expected?
Yeah, it's pretty different. I've gone through 4 careers, really. The first was as a musician, and it started when I was in high school. I started playing bands, and I was back in those days. There's a club on every corner almost, and I was playing 4 or 5 nights a week while I was still in high school. And when I went to college, I still continued to do that and tour, and it took a toll on my education, obviously, but I did that and continued to do it afterwards. And, made records, and then eventually moved to California and worked in studios as a musician, first of all, and did touring. And then the second career, as I transitioned into the studio as an engineer, a mixer, an arranger, producer. So that was number 2. Number 3 was writing, which kind of happened by accident. I was on a tour bus, and the bass player came on, and said, "I just got a job writing for the music paper." Now, the music paper was a really nice weekly paper in the New York metro area that came out. It was read by everybody on a consumer side, on a music insider side. It had everything that has to do with music. It was really a wonderful publication. And he said, "I got a job writing for this." And I thought, if he could do that, so can I. So I put some feelers out, and lo and behold, one of the bigger magazines said, "Okay, let's try something." and it gave me an assignment to write on a new Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young release and speak with their producer. And it's funny because I just came across that article not that long ago, and it was really bad. I've come a long way. Let's put it like that. But that became a secondary skill and also a secondary career for a long time, where I wrote for a dozen magazines. So in the meantime, I'm working in the studio, I'm writing, and being an engineer, you record things and then you mix them all together.
Yeah.
I was good at recording. I wasn't good at mixing.
Hmm.
But I knew the best people in the world. So I went to them and I asked them how they did it, and they told me. And I thought, if I want to know this, I bet some other people do too. Let me see if I can write a book. So I wrote the book not knowing how publishing works. I just wrote the whole book. And then I sent it out to 5 publishers, all of which wanted it. But there is one in particular that was really, they were quite active in trying to get my attention.
Yeah.
So I went with them. And actually, the person, Mike Lawson, has become my guru, my publishing guru, 20 years later, 25 years later. And so the next thing you know, you write one book and everybody says the same thing. I'm never going to do that again. There's a lot of brain cells die in the process. But because there was no book on mixing, and I was discouraged from writing it. There were people that said, you can't write this because it's so subjective. I thought, well, I'll try it. Let me see how this works. And I was able to do it and make something subjective and quantify something that was somewhat subjective. So that became a hit. And next thing you know, colleges were using it, not only in the United States, but all over the world. And then my publisher said, well, let's write a second book. Well, let's write the Recording Engineer's Handbook. And that went well. And it's like, well, let's do another one. Okay, the Mastering Engineer's Handbook. There's nothing on that. And it kind of went on from there, and it went on and on and on. But what happened to me anyway, I had 20 some books out, and I thought, if I write another one, I won't make that much money. If I write another 5, I'm not going to make that much more money the way publishing is going. So I thought there must be another way, which led me to career number 4, which I'm in now, was doing online courses. And it's basically showing people how all the stuff in the book that you write about and you can read, it's showing you in the flesh how it happens, and you can hear everything. So now I have online courses as well. And that led to, well, since you have courses, you have to know how to sell them, which led to digital marketing. And that became a whole separate career, one that I quite enjoy and quite like, to be honest with you. And one of the reasons why is there's not, I don't have clients I have to worry about. Everybody that's a consultant or if you work for somebody in any capacity, you always say, I love the work, I hate the clients. This would be a great job if it wasn't for the clients.
Yeah.
And now I don't have to worry about deadlines, about people saying, can you make it sound more brown? Gee, I really love that, but can you bring the hi-hat down a half dB in the chorus, and knowing that they're never going to hear the difference, and things like that. So it's a lot more fun now, to be honest with you.
Nice.
In career 4.
Nice. You said all 5 publishers wanted the book that you wrote, and this was the Mixing Engineer's Handbook, it sounds like, right?
Yes.
What do you ascribe that to? Because that's the opposite of most authors. Most authors get rejected by, 10 publishers and then finally find one that'll work with them. Did you just pursue the right publishers, or was it just the content was just what everyone wanted?
It's a combination of both, actually, because first of all, it was the content. There was no book on the subject at all.
Yeah.
And the second thing, well, maybe this should have been the first thing. I identified the only 5 publishers that were basically catering to my industry, catering to music, and they specialized in it. So, obviously they could tell whether it was something worthwhile or not. Now, that being said, they weren't major publishers, but they eventually became major publishers, but they knew how to market to the audience, the right audience. And that was worth more than going with the major publisher and, having them not know what to do with it, which happened later on. What happened is, again, my biggest selling books were eventually, what would be the word? Eventually brought under control of a big publisher, Cengage. Cengage is a really big educational publisher. And that's because they bought the small publisher that I was with. And what happened was, after a while, they said, we don't want to be in this business anymore. Do you want your books back? It's like, yeah, of course. So that took me into another realm, which is self-publishing books, which I got to tell you that it's been fantastic because I made like so much more money. But I also have to say, I can say all this about making more money as a self-publisher, but I was lucky. I had a leg up because I had these publishers, these real publishers that really laid the groundwork for me. So I already had an audience. And for someone today that's just starting out, it's obviously so much harder.
Yeah. When you first got started, was it guitar that you were playing before, or did you play multiple instruments at the beginning?
I was a guitar and a keyboard player at different points in my career.
How did you transition from that to like mixing and everything like that? Because most people that know how to play guitar or piano, they know nothing about a mix. They just, it's not a realm that they dive into. Usually you have a guitar player and they get to a stage where I want to record, maybe they get a cheap interface, GarageBand, something like that, and they start recording, and then they start learning mixing because they have to, not because it was something that they wanted to do. So how did that transition happen for you?
These are my customers, by the way. You're describing my customer perfectly. Well, what happened was I was always interested in electronics, and I have a degree in electronics. But the only reason why I went to school for it was because I wanted to find out where all the electrons went from my guitar into the amplifier and what happened, once they got there. Yeah. So I was more concerned with that. And when I was in school, of course, none of the courses had anything to do with that. And so I ended up learning a lot of it on my own. But I was always interested in that part of the business. I had a 4-track, and this dates me, but what can I say? Yeah. I had a 4-track recorder before anybody else in my county, I think, and was used to doing all of that stuff, recording, mixing, doing all that stuff, when I was basically 19 years old. Yeah. So I've been doing it for a long, long time. And then eventually, I went to Berklee College of Music. I toured for a while and then thought, I really want to learn more about the production side. So let me find out more about music itself and music theory. So I went to Berklee, and I was there for a couple of semesters, and they said, you have a lot of experience in the studio. Would you like to be a teacher? So I became an instructor as well as a student at the same time. That's not a good combination, believe me. It's not something you should do. So I only lasted one semester like that. Then I stayed on as an instructor at Berklee in the studio, teaching production, engineering, and mixing. for another, I don't know, 4 or 5 semesters.
No.
And then something dramatic happened. I didn't really like Boston to begin with, but I remember going into the teacher's lounge, and there was an older teacher who'd been around the block as a player and as a teacher, and he was ranting and raving, and he said, "This place is for rookies or has-beens." And it hit me right between the eyes. It's like, oh, I don't want to be either of those. So within a couple of days, I turned in my resignation, decided I was going to move to a media center, a big media center. There were only 4 at the time. It was London, New York City, Nashville, or Los Angeles. And I had my fill of the cold weather, so Los Angeles was the warmest of the 3, and that's why I decided to move here.
Yeah. You say you aged yourself talking about 4-track, but I think that's one of the big benefits. One of the big things you offer people is you offer people a way to see through the eyes of somebody who's been through the analog and the digital world. Because when I came into producing a little bit of music, it was all digital, and you're hearing all these concepts: producer, mastering, mixing, and especially when you're doing anything solo, all those jobs are really jumbled up. So you're hearing about, oh, you need to do your mixing, and it's like, what is that? Like, well, how do you even define that? And I think that analog experience where it's actually broken up into these different stages more clearly adds a lot of value to that. Do you feel like that has helped a lot in your teaching?
Well, yes, but just to be fair, they weren't quite broken up as much as you think back then. There was no such thing as a mixer at the time.
Yeah.
Whoever engineered also mixed the record, and that was kind of like the standard. So you were with the record from the very first downbeat until it was delivered. And then it went to mastering. And mastering isn't what it is today. Mastering today is a very creative. What mastering is the final stage where you can polish things up and then you send it off to distribution. But in the early days, this was called transfer, because you were transferring from tape onto vinyl. And that was a very tricky operation. It wasn't easy to do. And, required somebody that was really, specialized in it. So that's all they did at first. They just transferred from one format to another. And then all of a sudden somebody decided, well, wait a second, if maybe I can make this sound a little better, let me add some equalization, let me add some compression. Next thing you know, that became a creative process as well. Kind of what we know today, but it didn't start out that way at all.
Yeah. Has the loudness wars basically kind of faded away a bit? Like, are we out of that stage?
Yeah, sort of. For anybody who doesn't know what the loudest wars are, there became a point in time where everybody tried to make their records, and I'm talking about records and CDs, as loud as they could. The theory being, if mine is louder than yours, people are going to like it better. And there's some studies that actually say that's true. Believe it or not, that started in Nashville. And people would think, no, it probably started in pop music or hip hop or something. No, it started in Nashville. And there was a compilation CD that went out every week from the record labels to program directors of country record stations, radio stations. It was called CDX. And what happened was, if you were at a certain label, you'd say, okay, these 5 releases, are for this week. Let's put them on CDX. And another label would put their 2 or 3 or 5 or whatever. And if your stuff was up against another song and it was louder, next thing you know, the A&R person was saying, hey, how come mine isn't as loud as the other one? So then there became this war of, okay, I got to make it louder and louder and louder. And that really spilled over to popular music and everything else, much to the detriment of the sound. There's been studies that have found that when you make something that loud, you have to compress it a lot to do so. And you actually you actually decrease the listenability.
Hmm.
This happened in radio because radio does this. They have to compress it because they cannot go beyond 50,000 watts. They can't be 50,001 or they lose their license. So I mean, they did a lot of studies on this, and they found out that people will change the station if there's too much compression. And that's what started to happen to the music business, where people started to get, I'd go, yeah, I don't know. I don't know what it is about this that I don't like, but I don't like it. Next. So, this went on for quite a while. It's now changing, and it's changing because of streaming. The reason why is streamers have a much more reasonable level that they have. And it doesn't matter how loud or how soft your record is. They re-encode it up to down to their particular level. Yeah. So you gain nothing by actually having a super loud record, and actually you lose something because it's too compressed. Yeah. So, it hasn't completely gone away, the volume wars, but it's getting that way. It's going that way.
So streaming is a lot of the reason at this point.
Yeah.
Okay. Gotcha. Okay. You mentioned that I described kind of your client, people who started off playing an instrument and now they're starting to, want to do something more professional, record and make a song that's actually radio ready eventually. What are the things that somebody looking to make that transition in their music career, what are some of the things that people like that should be focusing on? What should they be looking into? Because in my experience, and I'm sure you would agree, the music world is just so big. There are so many different directions you can go. How does somebody find that right focus where they actually need to go?
One of the big problems in our business today, there's so much competition because anybody can get into it and anybody can actually become a producer or an artist. Yeah. The big problem there is there's no gatekeepers like there used to be. So there's no one there to say, hey, this is okay, but it's not great. And also what that does is encourages people to sound like somebody else. Hmm. I really like Taylor Swift, so I'm going to do everything I can to sound like Taylor Swift or Ricky Skaggs or, you name it. Yeah. So there's so much imitation where it's counterintuitive. It's like the best thing you can do is not imitate and actually do what you feel you should be doing, what excites you. It may not be instantly popular, but if it's something that's reasonably good, it finds an audience. But it's hard to convince people to do that.
Yeah. How do you find that original sound or your unique sound? Because most people, they get into music and they get into music because they've heard a bunch of music that they like and they want to maybe not make that exactly, but that's their inspiration. So how does somebody move away from just being inspired into actually making something of their own?
Yeah, Artie, I think this is it's a natural thing. If it's going to happen, it's going to happen naturally. Everybody starts out trying to imitate their heroes, and you learn that way by imitation.
Yeah.
But some people are better at imitating than others, where what you find is the real geniuses, they try to imitate, but it comes out like them anyway. And they'll tell you, oh yeah, I tried to imitate this particular artist. And you go, I don't hear that at all. And that's kind of the way that works, where you're trying to do it no matter what you can't. It just comes out like you. Yeah. Where there's other people that, yeah, they can get really close and whatever, but that doesn't do them any good. They're a good copycat and that's about it. So I've been around some geniuses. There's not many of them. And all of them are, again, they can't help themselves. They just sound like themselves, no matter what.
Are you talking about like with the way that they play or the way that they mix or both?
Both, actually. It's an approach. It's a different approach.
What is that though?
Yeah, I wish I knew. I wish we all knew.
Yeah,
it'd be easy to tell people then, but. Yeah. No, it's one of those things. I hate to say you either have it or you don't. It's not exactly true, but there's some people that have just an innate sense of what's cool and new, and it's them. It's like, well, this. I've come up with a definition for this. An artist creates for him or herself, while a craftsman does it for everybody else. So what happens is, where are you in that sliding scale? Are you more of a craftsman or are you more of an artist? And if you're doing it more for yourself, it's like, I don't care what people think, I'm just going to do this, then that usually works out better.
What drives you? I mean, you've been in the music industry so long, and you've created so much. When somebody creates as much as you have, it always makes me wonder, like, what drives you? What what do you attribute your output to?
Oh, that's easy. OCD. I get bored really easily, so I just go from one thing to another to another. And there's some truth to that for a lot of artists, I think, where it's like, yeah, okay, I'm going to do this, and now I'm bored. Let's go to
Yeah.
something else. So that's really it. That's why I constantly have a lot of balls in the air, but and that freaks a lot of people out when you have too many things going at once. But for me, it just energizes me.
I guess the some people are like that. I feel like I'm like that, but the problem is completing things. Like you actually complete things. You're juggling a lot, but you actually see. Maybe there's some things you don't, but you complete enough that your output is still very high. So how do you how do you pursue follow through on that?
Well, I complete most things. Part of it is I'm pretty good at scheduling things. Pretty good making lists. This is what I have to do. It has to be done by this time, and it gets done.
Yeah,
I find if I don't do that, if I don't make lists, then it's easy for things to slip time wise. But if I do make those lists, it's an internal commitment. I have to do it.
yeah.
Yeah.
When it comes to music that you enjoy, like what's the type of music that you tend to listen to? Or are you all over the map?
I'm tired of music. And but I'm tired of popular music. I'm tired of the typical 1-4-5 chord progressions. I don't want to hear another one. I like things that are different, that explore the outer reaches of music theory.
Hmm.
One of the most exciting things I've heard, I was in Australia a few years ago, and there happened to be a festival that was going on. It was on the steps of the Sydney Opera House. Not inside, on the steps. It was outdoors. And they had an act there from Papua New Guinea. And it was a hybrid act. Hybrid in that they had Aboriginal drummers playing with, I don't want to say it's a rock band, because it wasn't. They morphed every song from, they were doing hip hop into 5-part harmony, a cappella stuff, into, I don't know what it was, because it was Aboriginal, but it was modern. It was new. And that excited me more than anything in maybe 10 years, because it was just so different. It was very cool. And I found out what it was this was a special, in New Guinea. It's a French territory, and they don't like it. The natives. So this was an independence rally. And so most of the songs revolved around that, although I couldn't tell, and it didn't really matter, because I quite enjoyed everything, a lot, because it was coming from a different place. Now, what tends to happen in hybrid music a lot is there'll be a Western influence that'll happen, and it will feel tacked on to whatever is indigenous, or vice versa. So, for instance, it could have gone where, let's just say it's a hip hop feel, and they'd tack on these Aboriginal drummers, and it would feel like it doesn't belong. But this was so well integrated that it felt all together, and that's what excited me. It one influenced the other, but They were part of each other.
Yeah. So, you turn on the radio now, and it just doesn't interest you. You'd rather sit in silence, maybe?
Yeah, it doesn't interest me. Very rarely. I hate to say it. Now, it's not that I don't listen,
Yeah.
um, and it's not like I don't know what's going on, because I do. For my subscribers, many times what I'll do is do a what makes a song a hit. So I'll take whatever is the biggest global hit at the time and analyze it, and we'll go in and we'll figure out the arrangement, the production, the engineering, the sound. Why is this a hit? And it opens your eyes. You understand how things change and why they change. For instance, song forms have changed a lot over the years, and they've changed completely. It's going back, but if you looked at around 2020, somewhere, the 4 or 5 years around that, song forms became very, very simple. And they were simple because they were built around loops, EDM loops.
Mm.
EDM was a big influence at the time. So there's one chord change basically in the whole song, and it goes over and over and over. And in order to keep interest, there's a lot of production going on. Production meaning there's a lot of different elements that are coming in and out. You might only hear something once in the song, but they have to be kind of overproduced in order to keep your interest. You don't even realize that they're there. So this was maybe a low point in songwriting for me, because it's like, oh, come on, I'd really like to hear a bridge. And there's nothing like that. And there's no solos, and there's no intros and outros.
Yeah.
So now that's changed back, and we're starting to get to more traditional song forms. So that's healthy, I think. One of the big things that changed had to do with radio. So if you go back to the 60s, 70s, 80s, even into the 90s, there was usually really long lead-ins into the song. There'd be an intro that might be 15 seconds long, and there'd be a fade in the outro that might be 15 seconds. And that was strictly for radio. That was so the DJ could talk over it. And now we don't care about radio so much. Radio is not important and not influential to music, so those are gone. No reason to have them.
Yeah.
And that changed songwriting and song forms, quite a bit.
Yeah. That's really interesting that they did those intros and outros for the disc jockey, because I would have thought it was an attention thing. Like, before you were buying an album, you're listening to that album, so you're sitting there anyway, and that's why they already have your attention. And now it's like you get a C. Most people don't even get CDs or albums; they just get a song, and most of the time they probably don't even finish the whole song. They're probably not even paying attention. They're doing other things. They're so distracted. I would have thought it's an attention thing, not for DJs.
No, if anything, it's a negative for attention. But again, there was a reason for it. If you wanted the DJ to promote your song, that's what you do. But again, no longer a priority.
Yeah. I would be curious to dive into a little bit of what does make a hit song. Like, what have you noticed over the years? How long have you been doing that analysis?
Oh, maybe 10 years.
Okay.
And unconsciously before that, I was doing it because, if you're producing something and someone says, I want it to sound like so-and-so, well, then you have to kind of go find out what the bones are, of that particular artist, that song structure. Well, I'm sorry, what was the question again?
What have you noticed over the years as far as like what makes a hit song? Like what has changed with that?
Yeah, what makes a hit song? It really comes down to a couple of things. An interesting melody and interesting production. An interesting melody all the time will trump interesting production, but the two of them together are kind of unstoppable. So a melody, and we have this in a lot of songs, and this is a bad thing, where the chorus is basically the same melody as the rest of the verses in the song. The only difference is maybe now there's background vocals and there's big synthesizers and whatever, so that differentiates the verse from the chorus. But it's really nice when you have chord changes and all of a sudden the melody goes to a place you're not expecting. There's a music theory term for that, and I can't think of it right off, but this is actually part of music theory, where melody goes to an unexpected place. Think of the Adele song, Rolling in the Deep. When she gets to the chorus, it goes to a place where, and that's what pulls people in.
Yeah.
So it's something like that. So that will always, trump everything else. The second thing is production, though. You have to keep people's attention. So what does that mean? It means there's a lot of subtle changes that happen throughout the song to keep interest up. For instance, the song starts, it's big, it has 5 elements maybe. There's, the guitar, bass, and drums, and keyboard. And then the vocal comes in, the keyboard drops out. And you don't notice it consciously. It's a subconscious thing where all of a sudden there's space for the vocal. And then you get to the chorus, and not only does the keyboard come back in, but maybe strings come in and background vocals. Okay, so you get to the second verse, and now it's going to be a little bigger. Now the keyboard is back, but there's also things that are happening. There's background vocals that are coming in between phrases. There's little phrases from a guitar coming in. Again, things that you don't notice. It might be sound effects that are happening.
Yeah.
So the producer's job is to keep the song interesting, and the arranger, it's basically one the same to some degree now. And what is happening is there's all these little things, the way the song builds, because every song builds. It breathes. It's big, it's small, it's big, it's small. It's the same thing as any kind of art. There's tension and release. You can't have black without white.
Yeah.
You can't have bright without shadows, things like that. So you do that in a song as well.
Yeah.
And if you don't do it, then it's boring. Then it sounds like a garage band playing.
Yeah. So, I mean, earlier you mentioned that people kind of try to copy a lot of people, so there's not as much original content out there, especially with the gatekeepers kind of being not as relevant anymore. So if somebody should people even try to make a hit song, or should they just be trying to make what they like?
There's no point in trying to make a hit, because by the time, if you're trying to copy something that's already a hit, for instance, by the time you make it, the world has moved on to something else. So you're constantly behind. So that doesn't help. And I know, because I was kind of there for a while in the beginning of my career. That's what I did. So that's why, the only way you're ahead of the curve is to do what you feel is interesting and have people copy you, hopefully.
With hit songs, it seems like they kind of come in bunches. Like one song kind of sets the bar for that kind of style, and then you'll get a few more songs that hit the charts and perform well with that similar style, and then it kind of dies off and we're on to something new. Is that generally how it goes?
Yeah, there's copycat style for sure. If the trends in music used to change every 7 years, and we'd have something that was a big change. Elvis to the British invasion, for instance, and then the British invasion to and the Beatles into what happened in the 70s. I started, Bruce Springsteen and whatever. So every 7 years we'd have something, and now then it went to 10 years. We haven't had something in a really long time. It's beyond that realm, so we're due. But when it comes, all of a sudden, every record label is going to go to their artists and say, "Can you make something like this?"
Yeah.
And some will do it, and some won't.
That actually surprised me when you said it used to be 7 years. I was expecting you to say a shorter number. I thought that things were going to change faster now, because that's how society in general seems to be. We seem to move on to new things faster now.
Well, you can say that EDM was really big there for a while, and DJs, the land of the DJs, right before COVID, and that influenced a lot of pop music. And from COVID on, that really changed. It hasn't been the case. So now EDM is still out there, and it's electronic dance music for those of you who don't know what EDM means. And it's still a big genre, but it's not as influential. It's not across as many other genres.
Yeah,
No.
yeah. Well, in the EDM world, you'll get people who argue that certain things aren't EDM, that there's like a billion different genres within electronic music and stuff like that too. But it's interesting because a lot of music seems like electronic music now to some degree, like even like hip hop and stuff like that. Like there's electronic elements in a lot of it now.
And the reason why is it's easy to produce.
Hmm.
You don't need real live musicians
Yeah.
for the most part, and that's hard. Getting real live musicians to play well together is hard and or expensive, one or the other. So, and I must admit that was one of the areas that I had a lot of expertise in, working with live musicians in the studio. And there's less call for that because now people would prefer to work at home on their own, and they'll use virtual drums and virtual instruments or loops, and that's why music has become what it's become right now.
Yeah, but there's something that, I mean, I can do that. I can play on a MIDI keyboard and, you can use it, whatever sample you want, but there's something different. There's something very different from using a VST saxophone versus hearing somebody play a saxophone. Do you feel like that's going to come back more and more?
Yeah, everything cycles around. And
Yeah.
eventually, and there's some really good young musicians out there. Young musicians are probably better than ever, from the standpoint that they're learning well. They're they have a high bar and they're reaching it. The one downside, and I haven't seen this myself, but some of my good friends who are studio musicians have noted this. Where when we were growing up, we were very good improvisers, and we'd do what we'd call space jams, which basically you get together and you go, okay, and somebody'd start off and play something, everybody else would join in, and it would go where it would go,
Hmm.
and that it was the most fun you can think of. And younger musicians have a real problem doing that. I mean, they can play all this really hard stuff, but they're not particularly really good at improvising. Now, I haven't seen this myself, but I've noted this from some of my friends who are, around younger players more than I am.
That's interesting. Is there any underlying reason? Is it just the isolation of learning?
Yes. I mean, you have to play with other people,
Yeah.
and there's less of that these days. So, it's easy to play with your computer and everything. I had a situation a few years ago, just to show you how this works. I hadn't played out in a long time, a live gig.
Hmm.
And an old drummer that I used to play with called me up and said, I'm doing a festival. My band is doing a festival in Florida. Will you come and play? And I went, oh no, I don't have my chops up. And he insisted, and finally said, oh, okay, I'll do it. So I really rehearsed. I shedded like crazy against my computer for about 6 weeks, and I was feeling pretty good about myself. And there were two gigs. There was one gig in a club the night before, and then on stage at the festival. And I started to play with the band, and I realized how I couldn't keep up. Even though I was really good at playing to the computer, I couldn't keep up with real musicians. I could, what I was thinking was not being translated well to my fingers. It
Yeah.
was the most frustrating thing, but it happens
Why?
when you don't play enough.
Yeah. Why is that? Why couldn't you translate it?
Well, again, it's different playing against something that's canned against something that's live.
Yeah.
There is a big difference.
Just being able to what's coming with the canned versus the live. You don't.
Yeah, there's a lot of that. There's a lot of nuances You watch people, you watch what they're doing, you feel what they're doing, you hear what they're doing, and it varies a lot, and you have to know how to breathe with them.
Yeah.
So that's what I learned. That was
Yeah.
a very sad mistake. And I promised him that he would not put any of the footage on YouTube or anything, and thank God he didn't, because I'd be really embarrassed.
Well, it's cool that you still tell the story.
Yeah. Now that being said, there was one I was working with a rock band called Snoo, and I don't know how it worked out, but we decided we were going to do something. Recorded in a big rehearsal studio, and they needed a keyboard player, so I played keys, and they're playing in some hard keys. If you don't know, like, you try to stay in white keys, and that's easy, but he started playing black keys, like in keys like C sharp and everything. That gets a lot harder. And this was in C sharp, of course. And I had a big solo and everything, and I was surprised. It actually came out really well. It's like, oh yeah, okay, I can still do this. So
Yeah.
every now and then it works in your favor.
Yeah. Um, when it comes to songs and you, I mean, obviously you have an appreciation for music in general, but do you have like a gold standard? And is that gold standard different for different aspects of the song? Like, do you have a gold standard for like, this is a song that I consider mixed perfectly? This is a song that's maybe mastered perfectly, or, and maybe this song is just constructed. The structure is perfect.
Artie, this is something that we go over in some of my courses. It's called reference mixes.
Yeah.
So everybody has a reference, or should have a reference. And the reference is, this sounds really good to me, and I'm going to try to copy it. I'll try to get close. And it might be different for every genre, or it might be something like, I really like the sound of that vocal. Let me see if I can get it. Or I really like the reverb on this song. Let's see if I can get it. Or I really like the way the bass or the kick drum sounds. Let me try to get it. So, you might have, a dozen different references, but that becomes, so it's not just one song. It becomes a lot of them that are your gold standard. It's like, okay, I'm going to try to get this today, or this is perfect for this song that I'm working on, something like that.
I'd be curious to know what songs you never get sick of hearing. Are there a few songs that you just never get sick of?
Well, I'm a product of the 70s and the 80s, so there's a lot of those, to be honest with you.
Okay. I mean, I some of the best songs, in my opinion, are songs that were made before I was born. I was born 85, and I put probably Billie Jean is one of my top 3 songs of all time. I mean, Quincy Jones was a legendary mixer, obviously, and I just put that up there for sure.
So I knew Quincy, and I knew Bruce Swedien, who was his engineer for many years.
Oh, really?
One of the top moments in my life, and I'm thinking about it now, I'm getting goosebumps. I was in the studio. It was A&M Studio, which is one of the bigger ones in town in Los Angeles. And I forget what Bruce was working on, but somewhere along the line, he said, "Hey, do you want to hear something?" I said, "Yeah." And he said to his assistant, "Go get that tape out that we're playing just before." And it was a safety copy of Thriller from Michael Jackson.
Mm.
So we're in this great studio with great sound, and he cranks the thing up, and it was just fabulous listening to this thing. Like, no one's ever heard it like this unless you were there.
Yeah.
So it was really a high point in my life. I knew Michael as well, a little bit.
Yeah.
Quick story on that, his music business story. So I had a songwriting partner, and he knew Michael better than I did. That's how I met him. So we wrote some songs, and he played them for Michael, and Michael, liked really one. And he said, "Hey, can I put this on my next album?" I said, "Well, of course." So I'm thinking, you can't help. You start to think, well, the last album sold 30 million. If this only sold 10, and this is what and you start to, in your mind, this is the money I'm going to make, and you start to spend it.
Yeah.
You know, I didn't go as far as to actually spend it, but I knew what I was going to spend it on. So we were, of course, thrilled, over the moon by this. And then we hear that Michael is in the studio working on this new album. It turned out to be bad. But we hadn't heard anything back from him or his attorneys or anything. And I'm thinking, is he going to use this song or not? Wish he would have said something. Try to get in touch with him, and we can't. Try to get in touch, and we can't. Call the management, can't get through. So this goes on, and now I'm thinking the worst. This goes on for a while, and finally my partner gets in touch with Michael. And Michael says, this song is a hit. You should keep it because you need it more than I do. So what it meant was, he changed his mind. Yeah. It would have been a lot more helpful if he would have said, this isn't for me, but, if you did this and this and this, it would be a lot better. And let me take it to my publisher or, management or whatever. That would have been a lot more helpful than the way it turned out.
Yeah.
But it just goes to show you that it's a typical Hollywood story. You get promises and they don't often come true.
Yeah. I mean, you're in music studios in LA, which is where most of a lot of the music is happening. Did you ever have any times where, you were starstruck with who you were in the same room with?
Yeah, I was just thinking about this the other day. Who was it? Peter Gabriel. And this was at a party. And Peter actually came over to me. I was standing by myself against the wall, and he came over and he introduced himself, which is nice. And then I got run of the mouth. And I just started to talk, which is not like me at all, because I don't do that. And after a while, Peter excused himself, and I didn't see him for the rest of the night. So, yeah, that was one time I wish I could have back.
Yeah, that's funny. I'd be curious to hear what you think separates like a good mix from a pro mix. Or I've heard this before. I've heard a pro mix is really just a bunch of small good decisions that compound to make a really good overall mix. Is that mostly true, or what do you see that separates the two?
Well, first of all, if something is recorded and produced and arranged really well, the mix is easy. It mixes itself.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, you're mixing as you go along as you're recording, so it's pretty simple at the end. It gets hard when something is not well recorded, like most things at home.
Yeah.
And that's where a mixer, really it's wrestling with something all the time, wrestling with the alligator, and the alligator wins. So that's difficult. But things that are recorded well and are arranged well, they just tend to be easy. They work on their own. I'll give you an example. I forget where I was. And Ken Calais, who produced the big Fleetwood Mac records, is a friend. And he was doing a mix of Dreams, the big Fleetwood Mac hit, Stevie Nicks hit. And it was for a compilation or something. It was, it was a remix that he was doing. And I said to him, hey, would you mind if I just soloed everything up to hear what it was like? It's like, yeah, go ahead. I got to the hi-hat. Now, this hi-hat starts to play in its own. And I thought to myself, oh, this song is a hit. Now, I got that just from the hi-hat. Because the groove was so undeniable that I felt, oh, yeah, this is a hit just from listening to this.
Yeah.
And that's what tends to happen. There's something that is undeniable, that it captures the magic. That's not easy.
I would love to dive into that a little bit more because I've heard songs where, man, if one note, you hear one note and you're like, this song is going to be amazing. You've never heard it before, but you hear it might be a chord, it might be one note, it might be something like a hi-hat. Hi-hats are actually one of my favorite sounds if they sound really nice and crisp. Um, a lot of Quincy Jones songs, the hi-hats are
Hmm.
amazing, but sometimes you just hear one note and you're like, how do you know from that one note or that one chord that the rest of the song is going to be good? I mean, is it just somehow they put emotion into that one note or chord, or I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
You capture magic.
Yeah.
And again, that's not easy. It happens on its own. A lot of times you capture it and you can't recapture it.
Yeah.
And back in the analog days, we've all had those moments where you capture something and you think, oh, I can do it better, or the artist could do it better. And you erase it and you can't, and
Yeah.
you lose it. So
Yeah.
we don't have to worry about that these days, thankfully.
Yeah. As long as you have a big enough hard drive, you can record as many times as you want. What's something that people who have been solely in the digital world, what do you think they would benefit from understanding a little bit more about the analog world prior to digital?
This is kind of a universal concept that I hear from everybody that used to work in the analog world, and that's we had to make decisions very early on
Mm,
that in digital you don't, that you just put off and put off. For instance, I grew up in the studio in the 8-track world. We only had 8 tracks. So we had to figure out how these all put together, how we can get all this music onto X number of tracks. We had to know in advance what we're going to overdub. We had to figure out how we're going to fit it in. So we had to make all these decisions in advance. And now you don't have to. Now what tends to happen is, oh, I got an idea. Let me put it down. Oh, I got another idea. Let me put it down. Oh, I got another idea. And you couldn't do that back in analog. Now, when you got to 24 and 48 track, it was a little easier to do, but there's still limitations. So without limitations, there's a number of decisions that you just don't make that would be better off if you did. An example of that would be, and this is something that really bugs mixers a lot. It's not uncommon to put a lot of microphones on something when it's recorded.
mm,
So, for instance, an electric guitar, there might be 3 microphones or 4 microphones on the guitar amp. Now, back in the old days, that was okay. Eddie Kramer, who did all the Hendrix stuff, he showed me how he got the Hendrix sounds.
yeah.
And that was with a combination of 5 microphones. But he figured it out right away. How can I balance all of these so they go into one track? I only have to worry about that one track. And today what we do, we record them all on different tracks. And the thinking would be, well, I can decide later how I'm going to balance it out or if I'm not going to use any. And if you send this to a mixer, the mixer will pull his hair out or her hair out and go,
Yeah.
well, why didn't you decide this? Don't leave it for me. So there's a lot of that happens now that didn't back then. You just figure it out. And you had to go on your intuition. So and the more experienced you were, the more likely you were to make a good decision on that.
Yeah. So, I mean, I agree with everything you're saying. And, from my limited experience doing a little bit of solo production, I have a powerful computer. If I want, I don't have to print anything to audio. I can basically let things sit in MIDI and almost get to completion with a song. And the advice from everyone is like, bounce to audio as soon as you can. How the hell do people know when to bounce to audio? Like, how do you know when your sound should be bounced to audio or should it not be to that point? Should you plan on doing more processing afterward?
You should, as soon as you get something you like, you should commit to it.
Okay.
It's easy as that.
Yeah.
I've gotten caught a number of times where I get these really good MIDI sounds and they just exist in MIDI. So there'd be a MIDI track in the computer. And I'd come back to it a year later and the sound wouldn't come back because there was an update to the virtual instrument,
Mm,
and it would be a different sound.
yeah.
So, that's a good reason why you should print everything if you can.
Yeah. Makes sense. You mentioned something that a mixer might get irritated about you make not making the decision earlier on to get rid of those 5 guitar tracks. How does somebody know if they're going to be sending their song to a mixer to work on it? How does somebody know when it's at that stage where it can be sent?
At some point, you have to say this is finished. If you're signed to a record label, that's easy because they give you a date when they expect the record, so
Yeah,
you better hit it. And that's what dictates a lot of music, a lot, and dictates the end point
yeah,
because there's a marketing team that's all set to go. There's a lot that's really relying on delivery on that date.
yeah,
So that's what happens with the pros. With everybody else, it's harder because if you don't, and you should already know this. You should. One of the big problems that I don't want to say amateurs, let's just say less experienced artists have is that they'll do that. They'll record something and think, well, when it's finished, I'll put it out. But that's not the best way to do it because already while you're recording it, you should be planning your release. You should be planning on where it's going to go, who it's going to go to, how you're going to promote it, because you don't want to sit on it for 3 months afterwards. Oh, the song is finished. Now let's figure this out. It happens a lot.
yeah.
And by the time you figure it out, it's kind of old. So, you yourself should figure this out. Okay, this is the date we're aiming for, and this is why, and let's do it. If you got to push it a little, you push it a little, but it really helps to have that deadline.
So even if it's self-imposed, just having a deadline is
Yeah,
ideal. Yeah,
yeah.
because nothing's finished for an artist. Nothing. I mean, you can always find something that you think you can change for the better.
Yeah, but here's the problem. What I've noticed is you just make it different. You don't necessarily make it better.
Yeah,
I have a rule, and this is what I use in writing, but it works in any creative process. I have a 3-pass rule. So if I'm writing something, the first pass is stream of consciousness, and I just put it down with no concern about grammar, no concern about spelling or anything. The second pass I do, which is usually a day later, I'll tighten things up, put it in paragraphs, and make it look good. And the next day, I'll come back and I'll do a third pass, which is polishing it up. Occasionally, I'll do a fourth, but I found anything beyond that is just changing things. It's not making it better.
yeah,
But it works. That method also works in other creative processes as well.
yeah. That's a really good tip. I come from electronic music, and like you mentioned earlier, it is loops, and that loop can be either interesting based on the production quality that you have for the whole song, or it can be really boring because you're just looping and there's nothing interesting going on. How do you coach people on turning a loop into a song?
Well, again, if you're just working with loops, then you're kind of stuck in a production zone where you have to be a really good producer and arranger because that's what's going to keep it interesting. What are the other mix elements do you have? When do they come in? When they go out? Do you have a breakdown? Or so, and usually breakdowns are used these days as a bridge, especially in electronic music. So it's all those things that it's really EDM. Electronic music is a producer's realm, so you have to think like that.
Yeah. Um, I'd be curious to know of the trends because you've been keeping up with music trends for a really long time. Are there any that have caught you completely off guard? Like, I was not expecting that to become a trend.
I'll tell you, an artist, Billie Eilish, kind of surprised me. Didn't expect that one.
Yeah. What about her?
I don't get it personally, but
Hmm.
it's not music for me. So
Yeah. So
I'm
you're
irrelevant.
not like really a fan of her music at all?
No, no, I'm not. Usually, now that being said, I can appreciate. There's a difference between liking and appreciating.
Yeah.
I can appreciate why it's a hit. I can appreciate the magic it's captured. I can appreciate all of that, or why other people like it. Doesn't mean I have to like it myself
Yeah.
personally.
Yeah. Uh, is
But
there,
you know that's the point though. You should never discount music that you don't like or artists that you don't like because they have captured some magic and that's special.
yeah.
It's unique.
Yeah, do you feel like artists going off of that? Do you feel like better artists explore more territory in their consumption of music?
No, not necessarily. Um, they might they might be influenced, especially when they're growing up, by things that you don't expect.
Hmm.
You know, like big band or you know crooners from the 30s or something like that, and you go, I don't hear that at all,
Yeah.
but yet there it is.
Yeah. Well, having worked with a lot of artists, do some of them have really, really narrow taste?
Rock musicians,
Hmm.
especially hard rock or metal,
Yeah.
tend to be very narrow in
Yeah.
what they like
Why?
and be very opinionated about it as well.
Do you have any reason why that might be?
I think it's part of the culture, first of all.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's what I found. Uh, I've had interesting discussions with people about that. As a matter of fact, there's one singer who was trying to describe the sound he wanted, and he's saying, "Yes, but it's a lot like this, and then this," and he's naming singers that I have no idea who he's talking about, and these are like uh, speed metal or dark metal or you know, death metal or
Yeah.
whatever. It's like, ah, you better play an example for me so I understand.
Is that a genre you like? Like, do you like heavy metal?
And not particularly. And one of the reasons why is it seems to be stagnant,
Mm,
like it hasn't changed in 30 years,
yeah.
and it and people expect it to be that way. So maybe that's the way it should be. You know, I don't know.
I get a little it feels noisy to me. Like when I listen to heavy metal, I
Yeah,
like guitar. I like acoustic more than electric just because electric guitar, if not mixed well or mixed a certain way, just starts to feel really noisy to me after a while. I'm like, I need some change, you know?
yeah.
So yeah, when it comes to digital VSTs and stuff like that, there was a time before when they were not up to par with analog equipment at all. And that has changed over the years. Are there any areas where they still don't keep up with analog at all?
No, I think we've gotten to the point where I actually wish instead of everything being so looking backwards, we'd look forward, and it's really starting to get that way. Where plugins, VSTs, everything else was trying to emulate things back in the analog world. And just about all those things have been emulated now over and over and over and over again. So I like things that are out of the box and are thinking, you know, kind of a new approach
Yeah,
to things because we don't have to stay in that anymore, that realm.
yeah. Are there any plugins that you can think of that have really just really stretched your imagination of what was possible for a plugin?
Well, yes, but I have to say that the ones that do that tend to be technically complex.
Hmm.
And that's not especially good because it takes a lot of time.
Yeah.
Let me go the other way with it. Some of the new AI assisted plugins are really good. And they're good from the standpoint that they get you in the ballpark fast. You can't expect them to get you exactly what you need, but you can expect it to, you know, it sounds pretty good. Now let me dive in.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of those that are really good. And the AI plugins, for separation, for noise reduction are excellent.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
by the way, some of the less complex ones of those are actually the best. They're better than the ones that are very complex.
What do you mean there?
Well, I'll give you an example. One is Hush. It's called Hush. And this is noise reduction. And there's basically nothing that you do except drop the file in. And it does a
Yeah.
better job than most of the others that are, there's a lot of parameter controls and all. A second variation on that is DX Revive, which is fantastic for noise reduction. This is one of those things where if you record somebody in a big parking garage and it's all echoey and everything, DX Revive will make it sound like the person is sitting right next to you in a chair.
Yeah.
And there's one control on it. That's it.
Hmm.
And it's like $29, even better.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I have an AI noise reduction plugin. It's just three knobs. It's like the main volume, your reverb, and then your noise. And it's like it does a great job. And I mean, this is something that I forget what Isotope's suite for like noise reduction and stuff like that.
RX.
Yeah, yeah, but
Yeah.
that's like a 10 times more complex, if not more. It's a very complex program. And from my experience, I couldn't even get close to the results that I can get with AI. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's quite amazing. So,
Yeah.
uh, speaking of AI, does AI worry you at all as far as the music industry? People can make a song with AI now, in 30 seconds. They can have sound design done with AI. So there's just a lot that they can do that people used to have to spend a lot of time doing. Do you worry about that ruining the industry or certain parts of the industry at all?
Well, there's a lot of layers to that question. I think there's two places especially that AI will have a big impact on. One is mastering,
Hmm.
because AI mastering is really, really good. That said, a real mastering engineer will beat it, but at a much higher cost.
Yeah.
And it won't be all that much better. It'll be better,
Yeah.
but not some people might not notice. The other is in production music. Production music is the music, the incidental music that's usually behind videos, like on YouTube or something that somebody just puts in that you don't pay attention to, but it's there.
Yeah.
And that was a good living for a lot of composers for a long time. But that's one area where AI can do really well.
Yeah.
So then to the other layer of your question, now anybody can make some songs. There's limitations to them. And you hear some great examples, and usually the examples are not what they seem, because the examples are actually somebody who knows what they're doing, who's augmenting all that stuff with more instrumentation, and they're editing, they're copying, pasting, whatever. So it's not as simple as, oh, make this sound like Billie Eilish, for instance.
Yeah.
uh, and yes, you can get that, but you can get 40 seconds of it. That's not a song. Now what we have happening right now, what is happening is that a lot of that AI slop is now being uploaded to Spotify and the streaming services, and that's a shame. That just makes it worse for everybody. So,
Yeah.
and the reason why is the way people get paid is not by stream. It's not, you don't get paid 2 cents a stream or anything like that. There's a big pot.
Yeah.
So all the money goes in a pot, and depending on the number of streams, it gets divided in the pot, and that's how much you get paid. So now you have all these other songs that are competing for your pennies.
Yeah. I I saw somebody speculating. I don't think this has been verified at all, but somebody was speculating that maybe Spotify themselves are actually creating some AI songs and starting to upload them. Potentially, I guess that could be seen as taking revenue away from real artists and stuff like that. But yeah, it's just one of the concerns that people have.
It's true. It's outlined in a book by Liz Paley, just came out, and in fact, it's true. I've been doing it for a while, and there's been a lot of. She, actually went on the ground. She went to Sweden to find these people.
Yeah.
Uh, So Spotify basically decided, well, wait a second, why don't we just pay for some people to make some music, and then we don't have to pay royalties because we'll just pay them outright.
Yeah.
So what can we do? Well, there's certain playlists, chill playlists, sleep,
Yeah.
things like that. The people don't necessarily pay attention to the song that much. It's the sound.
Yeah.
And then they find out that, 99% of the playlist is AI generated, or it's generated by an external artist that Spotify's paying. So that's not quite fair, although now it might change that the spotlight is being shown on them.
Yeah. Yeah, it's frustrating because it seems like if you're going to provide a platform for artists to be heard, then you shouldn't be watering down that platform with competition for those artists too. But yeah, I guess there's no there's no law against it necessarily, but it's very frustrating. So yeah, what do you see happening? What are some trends that you think are going to be happening in the coming years, coming maybe 5, 10 years?
I wish I knew. I wish I knew. And I say this because we're always surprised when a new trend comes. It's something that we're not expecting. For instance, when hip hop came, in the early 80s, no one was expecting that. EDM, when it really broke out, no one was really expecting that. I would say whatever is hot in the underground right now is what is signaling the next trend. I think one is Afrobeat
Hmm.
that I hear a lot of talk about.
Yeah. Interesting. Interesting. Do you feel like AI is going to be more and more involved with music in the coming years?
Probably, but again, it's a good tool. It's a good tool in the hands of people that know what they're doing. And there are so many good AI plugins, like I say, right now. Not for finished product, and I think that's where people go wrong. They think, well, I'll just use this, and that's I'm done. I don't have to do anything else. But no, it'll give you a good starting place. That's about it. Uh, there's no program that will do mixing yet. There's some out that will do balancing for you, that will try, but no real mixing in that you don't get effects or subtleties that a really good mixer will bring. Dave Pensato, I don't know if you know who he is, but he's a Grammy-winning mixer. He's done Michael Jackson and Pink and people like that, Mariah Carey. And back in the CD days, he used to tell me that people hire him because they want to sell 10 million, not 1 million, which goes to show you what a really good mixer will do. It will take you to yet a new level.
Yeah.
And AI is not going to get you there right now, anyway.
Yeah, I personally kind of doubt that it will be capable of that anytime soon. Do you tend to agree with that, or it just seems a bit complex for even AI to tackle?
I have a friend that's trying to do it,
Hmm.
and he's been working on it for a year.
Yeah.
And every time he gets a beta and he sends it out, he takes it down immediately. So it's not exactly working for him. Uh, again, there's a lot of elements to it, and they're subtle. But I won't say never. And again, I go back to my mixing engineer's handbook where people said you can't do that because, whatever
Yeah.
reason. And yet we did it.
Yeah.
So never say never.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, your mixing engineer's handbook is amazing, and it is surprising. It is surprising that you can put it in on paper to explain what you're doing with audio because, I learned from a lot of music or YouTube tutorials, stuff like that, where it's like you see what they're doing and you're able to hear it. Now, obviously, with a book, you can't hear anything. I think you have do you have a companion CD with that one? companion audio maybe that you have for a few things. But yeah, I'd love to hear how you overcame those obstacles of like, how do you translate that into a book, something that most people think you need to hear.
Well, that's where my courses came in because now you can hear it and you can't see it. And it's everything that's in the books and more. Um, I don't want to say it's more up to date, but there's a lot of new stuff in it, and it's just the basics. I get questions all the time. People are reading the book, and it's like, well, yeah, okay, I get why you don't get that. If you saw it happening, you would,
Yeah,
and if you heard, before and after, you'd get it.
yeah. Well, I mean, there's just so much that I've learned from your books. I mean, I think
Well,
this is the producer's handbook, but it's like I was producing for probably 2 or 3 years before I learned from your book how to actually place my monitors correctly. Because, I think we're so used to we just ignore the difference between our eyes and our ears, that little distance, and we when we're thinking about hearing something, we just kind of tend to eyeball it and we're going off our eyes, but it goes behind your ears. It kind of converges behind your ears. And after I made that little change, I was like, I can hear better. I can actually hear my mixes a little bit better, which is amazing. So it's just those little tips like that that you have just scattered throughout your books are just so valuable.
no, thank you. You can't mix it if you can't hear it.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. There's a concept that I don't know if it's ear candy. A lot of music producers will talk about ear candy. This is more solo producers that I'm thinking of, but that has always been a very elusive concept to me. What do you consider ear candy? What are people doing when they create those little things that just make our ears happy?
Okay, well, that's what I was talking about before in production and arranging. It's just a different term for the
Yeah,
same thing. It's those little parts that come in that make it interesting, that change one section of a song from the previous one. And that's ear candy. It's most of it's subtle. Unless it was pointed out, you wouldn't know it's there, but it is there and it does do its job. It keeps you interested.
yeah, awesome. Well, Bobby, it's been quite amazing talking to you. Before we wrap up, first of all, I know you're an author, but I love to ask people about other books that they've read. Are there any books that have been influential for you aside from the books that you've read or that you've written?
Yeah, influential. I'm not so sure. I read a lot. I read a lot of music biographies, especially,
Hmm.
and but are they influential? No.
Well, just books that you've really enjoyed then.
This is going to sound weird. I can't think of any right now.
Hmm. Okay.
I just I'm drawing a blank.
Yeah. Yeah, no
This would be
problem.
one of those things where I'll go back and 10 minutes from now, I'll go, oh yeah, there's that and there's that and there's that.
Yeah, yeah. Well, if somebody asks me that question, I'll probably name a bunch of books that I can see and then think of 30 more that I can't see at that
Yeah,
moment
sure.
anyway. So
Yeah.
I get it. But yeah, I wanna thank you for joining me for this conversation. It's been really awesome being able to pick your brain a bit. Before we wrap up, I want to offer you the chance to tell listeners where they can find you, what you have going on, your website, social media, anything you want to share.
Well, the best place to find any of that is bobbyowsinski.com, and that will take you to my blogs, my podcast, social media, all that stuff. So that's a good place to start. My It'll take you to my courses, to my books, all that's on there. So that's the main central hub. Coming up in a few weeks, beginning of March, actually, it's more than a few weeks. Uh, I'll have my mixing EQ challenge. That's a 3-day challenge, and gives you. I'll show you some EQ techniques, and you'll be able to send your mixes in. Some of them which I'll comment on. So that's always a lot of fun. So that's coming up.
Nice. So are these stems that people use to, and they're all mixing the same thing or mixing their own music?
Mixing their own music.
Okay. Awesome. Awesome. And you do competitions like this frequently?
It's not a competition at
Okay.
all. All it is I'm challenging you to do to understand these three techniques,
Okay.
because by the end, that will make you a much better mixer.
Awesome. I love it. Well, Bobby, thank you so much for joining me today. It's been an honor to talk to you.
Thank you, Artie. Thanks for having me.
I really appreciate it.